I believe that we are live. Hello, Mark Pfister. Hello, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome to the the Octopus Movement podcast that is highlighting founding members. And the founding members of the Octopus Movement, if you have not been aware, are people who are highly involved in connecting with one another and doing so in the way that works and not the way that it should happen. We are solving problems and we are having a marvelous time. So we'd love you to join us. And with me today, I have Mark Pfister, and Mark is a founding member who has done a lot with his life. This is a lot of different things, like many of us, and it's really come to a purpose of conscientious leadership and bringing people together so that there are no people who aren't employed. There's so many things that are Mark Pfister, and so I would like to introduce him now. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you. It's great to be here. A pleasure and an honor today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure and an honor for us too. So tell me, you first came to the Octopus Movement. You found this group of people and you came to your first event. Tell me what that felt like.
Yeah, so I found the website. I don't know how. It was probably linked on somebody's, LinkedIn message or something. I just found myself at this website and it spoke to me. theoctopusmovement.org/manifesto. If I remember right, that's where I had landed. And I'm just going, this speaks to me and I have to be a part of it. Where's the link? How do I sign up? So I did, and I joined the first call. It was a Meet the Octopi or Meet the Octopuses, and had a chance to meet several people, and I found my people.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. There's a feeling of utter arrival and belonging and comfort and excitement that I've had when I've been in the movement when I first got here. There's and when we have that, it's like we belong. We just belong. And it's not like we haven't belonged all along, but we just belong. So that's the feeling that I have gotten, and I've gotten from a lot of other people who've been on this podcast. So aside of belonging, what is it that you are doing to show up in the world? You have this real manifesto of how we belong, how we can be in conscious leadership. And I want to know more about that. What is conscious leadership?
So let's break it down into two words: conscious and leadership. Of course, leadership, most people think that that's, people who have direct reports, people who are like Perry Noppert, the leader of our movement, someone who is out there and, orchestrating all of the things, 8 tentacles, just doing all of the things.
Right.
And that's not leadership at all. You see, conscious leadership, the modifier conscious, has a couple of different components in my definition, though other conscious leaders might define it a little differently. So I've interviewed 92 people. So I'm going to take you back 11 years to a day where I burst out in tears because I suddenly determined I had interviewed 62 of the 92 at the point I had determined I was not humble. I was looking at the attributes, what it is that makes people go from good to great. You know, they're a good fill in the blank. They're a good engineer, or they're a good person, or they're a good, you know, whatever your community is. It might be a church, it might be a nonprofit. Whatever that community of people is that are together, someone might be good, but then in the eyes of their peers, they were propelled to greatness. Not by their own estimation, but in the eyes of their peers. And so I was interviewing people based on their peers having said, that person has gone from good to great. And I started looking at, is it servant leadership? Because I'd read so much about it. Is it transformational leadership? Because I've read so much about that too.
Yeah.
I wanted to hear directly from people and then study kind of what makes them tick and what gave them aha moments that said, I need to be more like this and less like this. For me, having interviewed so many people and seeing the patterns, starting to put it together into a definition. So yes, it's one part servant leadership, where the idea is service, being of service, having an outward mindset is key, but there's more. Is it transformational leadership, where the big idea is transformation of the group, of the organization, for the customer, for all of the stakeholders, yes, but also transformation of the self. That's another angle to transformational leadership that anyone who proclaims transformational leadership as their style would say it's about making everything and everyone better. But there's another component, and it's the component called everyday leadership. This is the component that brings it into every single human's space. That when you influence another person by saying something positive, by smiling, by handing them a lollipop. One of the people I interviewed is Drew Dudley. Google or web search lollipop moment, a really amazing TED talk back when he used to weigh quite a bit more. He's now nice and trim, but the point is, lollipop moment, Google that one. It's about everyday leadership. It says it doesn't matter who you are. You could be 101-year-old grandma in Kenya in a tiny village. And yes, she's one of the 92 I interviewed, who never, had a person reporting to her a day in her life, but the whole village called her mama. And her leadership was complete. So this is everyday leadership. It's helping the old lady across the street. It's thanking the person checking you out at the grocery store for their service, for their excellence. Who does that? People who are conscious leaders thank others for their service. That's kind of a nutshell what I learned from 92 conscious leaders.
Yeah, and that's a lot of learning. It's beyond this idea of not being a boss, but being a leader. But how are we a leader, and how do we aspire to lead in our neighborhoods, within our communities, within our families? And it smacks of the of personal responsibility. But how is this personal responsibility? Well, when we want to see that change, when we want to actually affect our environment, then we become responsible for it. We get the consequences of that, and everybody around gets the consequences of it, and it has a ripple effect. It's such a brilliant observation, and yet it's not how we think. And that's the thing about the octopus movement. We come in here and we realize that we've been looking at things, and we all believe in change. That's something that, and we all want to, we all look at things in a different way, which I think a lot of humanity does, but we celebrate that, how we look at things in that different way. So as you looked at all of these 92 leaders, and you came to that moment of humility in saying, I have not shown up in a humble way. I have not been a humble being. That was a huge moment of humility. What change did that bring about in you?
The big one is, Viktor Frankl wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning. This was man's search for humility. Yeah. I'm still on that path, and I'm nowhere near there. It's, my base neurology as a nonlinear thinker systemizes everything. And I was, from a very young age, pretty smart in some ways. I couldn't do this and this and this and this, but other things were developing more rapidly. So with that said, sometimes the smarter kids have trouble being humble. And I was no exception to that rule. My graduation speech from high school, I thought it was pretty great standing up there and asking everyone to define success for themselves. Forget what society says is success. Define it for yourself. I thought it was pretty great in that moment. And I've thought I was pretty great in many other moments too. But when I burst into tears that day about 11 years ago, I realized there were 2 people from the 62 I had interviewed up until that point who were truly the epitome of humble, and I was not that. So how did I started studying these people? I talked to them further because I let them in on the secret that I had just learned. Hey, look, I'd scientifically proven that you had humility where most of your peers simply do not. And they let me in on a couple of things. But the rest of the 30 people that I talked to after that, I made certain that I was finding some level of humility in each person that I interviewed before I interviewed them. And I asked them, I modified my questions just slightly at that point to ask them about what humility means to them. And one person quoted Lewis Carroll, and I thought it was just the most brilliant quote on humility ever. And as this is one of the traits of the greatest leaders. You see, Jim Collins, in his book, Good to Great, talks about humility and a strong will being the keys to making companies go from good to great. It's also the key to allowing the individual to achieve the greatest things in their lives. That quote is, humility isn't thinking less of yourself. It's thinking of yourself less.
Yes. Yeah. Bingo.
And angels sung and horns blared. Such a
Yeah,
great quote.
yeah, that that is a great quote. And the thing that I notice, and you're being asked to define humble human centrically versus system in a way of system relevance, and is it something we're born with, or do we have to learn it? I want to um, rephrase this as, do we all have it in us, and do we need to find it further when we have something, some other way of showing up in the that is our unique brilliance, but we don't, but it comes across as odd and not fitting with the system centric model. We may actually grow that that, hey, here I am, I did that really well, because we have to be our own freaking cheerleader. So, but is that humility in us, and how do you suggest others bring it out?
So, of course, it's all in us, but it's not outwardly expressed until there's motivation to outwardly express yourself differently. Part of humility is listening, and listening actively. Listening in another person's universe means that my universe is shut down. So that's humble listening. So that's part of the behavior that I needed to learn, that I was taught by others. Also part of the behavior, like I just quoted from Lewis Carroll, that thinking of yourself less. You know, when another person's speaking, if you're listening to find a place to say something yourself, then in a sense, you're thinking of yourself more. So that curiosity about others, that ability to listen and ask clarifying questions. So if I got you right, I'm not sure I heard you right, or let me see if I got that. Any of those kind of transition questions that say, let me rephrase what you just said, allows the other person to really hear that you were listening first. Second, feel heard. It's a feeling that they then have.
I
So
call
not
it
only do they
witnessing,
know
being
you're listening,
witnessed.
but they feel you're listening.
Yeah.
And it's impossible to be humble if others don't feel that you see them.
Mm-hmm.
These two are very much related.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the human-centric interpretation of humility, whereas system-centric is more like what Jim Collins describes in his book, Good to Great, where he studied the corporation as a system and what does it take to transform an organization into a company that goes from good to great. And he did it scientifically, looking at the stock market, where the company actually did that, whereas every one of their competitors did not. They simply, grew a little or flatlined. They simply didn't hockey stick. And so he wanted to know what makes those companies. He looked at it from a system-centric perspective, but what he found were human-centric principles, a strong will. All of the leadership had a strong will, but they also were humble. They didn't think that they were the greatest thing that the company had been given. They hired people that were better than them and trusted them, created psychologically safe spaces. This is the humility that Jim Collins wrote about in that system relevant but amazing book, good to great.
It sounds as if it comes down to, in the end, in every way, how do we make people feel? And that this is going to come out if you're trying to make business exponentially grow. It's not going to if you don't make people feel the way that you're trying to make them feel. If you've got some product or something that makes them feel terrible, then probably you're not going to go very far anyway. This is an incredible opportunity to look at listening too, at because there's this whole idea of active listening, and that active part is still like it's like, oh, I'm active, so I have to act like this. No, don't act. Don't act, and listen, and just let you can't get rid of your ego, but just set it aside and listen.
Or
And
can
when
you?
you do, you can trust that.
Or can you get rid of your ego?
Oh, maybe. A lot of people say, this is so conjectural that I like to say that we just set it to the side because it's up, the jury is out.
So one of the people I interviewed, an amazing, amazing soul, taught me how to actively listen. But it's not active in a physical motion sense. No. It's active in a brain sense. And I developed a method called the HEAR method. The acronym was stolen from somebody else's HEAR method of listening. But I adapted it using this person's advice. So HEAR, halt your universe. Just power it down. Ego, gone. Judgments, beliefs, mindsets, gone. So your universe is halted. Now enter is the E, enter their universe. Because over there, birds might fly upside down. A, anticipate learning, because in this other universe, things may or may not be the same. And then in the last step, it permits you to actually ask those reflective, reflective. Reflect back, if I heard you correctly, or for you, it's like this, is that right? So that reflection of their own words, kind of back at them in a slightly different way, maybe in a way that you're trying to interpret their universe. You're trying to really see them. The R is reflection, but it's also a great practice to reflect much longer afterwards. After all, you might discover that maybe you didn't show up as you wanted to. Maybe an apology is necessary. Maybe you need to ask another clarifying question because later you're thinking about it, it's on the back burner, and something that person said, you want some more on. So that later reflection is also key to humility, according to the person that I interviewed, who is this amazing servant leader from Utah Valley University.
Trust. I hear the letting go of the ego, and there's something that we bring in when we let that go, and that is trusting that our presence is enough. Our presence will hear everything, and we don't need to calculate what we're going to say, because there's a natural ebb and flow. There's part of our founder, Perry Knoppert, talks about the space in between thoughts. And that's where we are. This is what I feel, that's where we are, between thoughts, and stopping there, suspending ourselves there when we're listening to someone else, and then we can witness them. And when we witness them, we're going to have that takeaway, and that learning, and that maybe I could have done more. Maybe I can connect in a different way. And it comes when it comes. Just trusting that.
Indeed. You just nailed it.
It's a beautiful work. What made you take on this special interest when you did?
Well, the first effort was an attempt to transform those who were not in leadership positions at eBay and PayPal. I wanted to know what propels a person, what kind of aha moments were there in their career that helped propel them to greatness, because I wanted to inspire. We have had thousands of individual contributors, just tens of thousands actually. And, some seem to rise meteorically in their influence, in their ability to help transform themselves and others, transform the company, invent things. Like, what makes those people tick? I really wanted to know. I was hyper curious.
Yeah.
And so I started this effort with the permission of my chief technology officer to go ahead and interview a bunch of individual contributors. And so most of those 62, those first 62 were individual contributors. And I accidentally proved Jim Collins's his conclusion: a strong will and humility in the individual contributors, in addition to those who are in leadership roles. So it's the same two attributes that make up the core of conscious leadership.
It sounds very much like how we also survive, and how we thrive, and then how we transcend. In survival, there's a place where we go to, if we manage the job well enough, make it through. There's a place where we have to be humble enough to be with ourselves in that moment, to cut off our own arm. This is a little bit gory, or to actually do what we need to do in order to survive, and not just say everything is coming down on me and I'm being put upon. And that's a very not humble stance. We become humble and we persevere. And then you can bring that out into the world if you manage to do that in the right way.
Survival is a whole other topic.
Absolutely. And I'm just thinking out loud.
I don't know that humility nor a strong will, perhaps the strong will is the key component to survival, like the person who was trapped in a canyon, who really did have to cut off his arm. That was actually here in Utah that occurred.
Yeah.
And strong will to survive. I can do without this arm, but I can't do without water and food, because he'd been there for 3 days and there was nobody coming to save him. So that's what it takes, is that strong will there. Humility, not so much in that case.
Well, he's gone on to be a leader.
Truly.
So that's actually an interesting place where that went. And I don't know. I feel like there is humility in deciding that we are going to persevere to survive instead of, because it's a lot to cut off one's arm, and one can be stoic about it and say, we're going to either starve and perish from lack of water, or we're going to get ourselves out of here without an arm, and we're going to do whatever it takes. And whatever it takes is not an ego-driven thing. It's a whatever it takes thing, and that is perseverance. But I feel like they go hand in hand. And that's just, what I'm thinking right now. I could change my mind.
So someone asks, why do people want to be leaders in the first place? The truth is, not everyone wants to be a leader and use that word. The 101-year-old great-great-grandma that I interviewed in Matatani, Kenya, had no such language, didn't want to be a leader. She wanted to serve.
Right.
So she, at 101 years old, with her boobs hanging down to the ground, not kidding, sweeping the entire village's walkways, all dirt, yeah, but sweeping all of their walks, still serving at 101.
Yeah.
That's leadership. I don't care whether you think, oh, well, no, it's not because they don't have direct report. No. That's a false definition of leadership. Yeah. Again, watch that lollipop moment YouTube video. It'll transform your entire idea of what leadership is. Everyday leadership.
Yeah. And it's also, interestingly enough, it's flow.
It's flow. Nailed it. Nailed it.
Well, this has been a great conversation. I could go on for another hour, and I know that you could, but we need to wrap it up. So if you would like to get in touch with Mark, I have seen that maybe that'll be brought back up. There it is. There's Mark's website. And you can also get in touch with him on Pick My Brain. So that is a great place to hop on and have a conversation with Mark Pfister. Mark, thank you so much for being on the show and showing the world your brilliance and your service.